Hey guys, welcome back to For the Nation podcast. In today's episode, I had the distinct pleasure of sitting down with a very good friend of mine, the modern day Indiana Jones, Dan Brahim, also known as Battlefield Curator on YouTube. Dan is one of the most knowledgeable people I know on World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, really just military history in general, and has since accumulated a very good collection of those era firearms. So without further ado, let's get to the episode. And we're live. Thank you for coming, Dan.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great. Glad for you to be here.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for the invite. I don't usually do these, but hopefully I can get more into the podcasting realm a little bit later on, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're doing good on YouTube so far. How long have you been on YouTube?
So I've initially had my YouTube channel since like 2006, and I made a lot of short films, but I really wasn't focusing on like growing a subscriber base. I was just putting content out just because, you know, I just enjoyed it. You know, that's what I enjoy doing, creating content. And I recently, within the last year, I really started, you know, pushing a lot of the historic weapons and history on YouTube. And you know, the more consistent I got, and I built a pretty good subscriber base so far, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's extremely informational and interesting stuff. We watch it at work, and from knowing you at work, I've been always watching, and you kind of got me into the whole historical firearm, the world, and I bought a Mosin Nagant from you.
Oh yeah, that was hey man, you can't go wrong with the Mosin, and I gave it to you for under market value. So
yeah, you gave me a really good deal.
Yeah, and you know how much they go for now?
Not a clue.
They are in the 600s now. Yeah, so
Jeez.
Yeah, your Mosin pretty much doubled in value within the last year.
Yeah, I have a Russian friend, so I was sending him a picture of it, and I says, "Oh, look at this Russian Mosin Nagant that I got." And I nicknamed it the Soviet Slayer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it's cool. It's really cool, especially with the bayonet. Like, being from the modern era military, you don't really get to see a bayonet or that style weapon anymore unless it's through, like, a museum or someone like you. So to be able to hold it, fire it, and, like, just wield it in general is pretty cool, especially with, like, your knowledge and background of all of these weapons and knowing where they came from, all that stuff. And that's really what you cover in your YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, so a lot of my YouTube channel is pretty much the history of some of these weapons, these vintage weapons that they have a niche, and they're unappreciated in some aspects because they're, you know, in general, when somebody looks for a firearm, they don't generally go to a used wooden rifle from like World War II, you know. They want something modern. They want something that looks snazzy. They want something that looks cool, you know, and they're going to pay for it. And some of the, you know, the cheaper, you know, old World War II rifles or World War I rifles, I mean, they're still relevant and you know, but they'll be cheaper and they're fun to take to the range. They're fun to shoot. And the history behind these weapons are really something to appreciate. And I think someone looking at historic firearms doesn't really get it until they understand the history behind them.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just listening to the newest video you put out, the M1 Garand, or Garand as you say, which we had a debate at work about how it was said, and it turns out I'm wrong. It is Garand, of course. So it's really cool to see. I had no idea. The most interesting fact, and you might hate me for this, but the most interesting thing that I learned from that video was that International Harvester produced weapons during World War II.
Right. The tractor company that later also produced vehicles too developed the International Harvester M1 Garand, and they had trouble. They really did. They had to retool a lot of their machinery, and they couldn't get off the ground with the barrels. So they had another company produce the barrels, and those barrels ended up being you know, one of the more accurate barrels that you can get in M1 Garand.
Really?
Yep. I can't remember the name of the company now that made the barrels, but I'd have to go, you know, take apart my M1 Garand and find out what the manufacturer is.
That's so cool. Yeah, that and then that ping. That's the signature sound, right?
Right, right. And the ping sound, you see it in movies, you see it in video games, it's iconic. When that clip ejects out the top and makes that distinguishable ping sound, it's like music to my ears.
Yeah, it is. It's a fantastic sound. How is the kickback on that?
So
I've yet to shoot an M1 Garand, so
so the recoil's not too bad. I mean, it does shoot a 30-06, and
big
you know,
caliber.
you shot the Mosin Nagant. It's less than that. The Mosin Nagant's going to have a lot more recoil simply because it's a bolt action weapon. There's no spring to kind of take the gases and the recoil out of your shoulder, right? So when you shoot an M1 Garand, it's a quick punch to the shoulder. When you shoot a Mosin Nagant, it's a quick punch to the shoulder, and the Garand is more or less like a subtle kick, you know.
Right. Yeah, the Nagant that I shot, let me tell you guys, it's like firing a shoulder cannon. That thing, it's heavy. It's got to be all of, I don't know, 10, 15 pounds. It's a heavy, especially with the bayonet attached up front. It's kind of hard to.
Yeah, it's probably around 8 or 9, maybe around that 10. Yeah.
10 pound.
Yeah.
Jeez.
The bayonet adds more weight to it because when you have the bayonet attached on there, obviously it's a long metal rod sticking out the front. So.
Yeah. So, what do you think is your most favorite World War II era rifle?
You can't ask me that because I got so
All of
many. There's so many rifles that were produced with the innovation of smokeless powder, going away from black powder. There were so many weapons, and then on top of that, so you're looking at the late 1800s into like the 1950s. If you just look at the amount of weapon innovations that happened during that time frame, it's astonishing, right? It was truly an innovative time. So to pick out a favorite, even in World War II, I mean, there were so many nations involved and so many different weapon types, a lot of prototypes and a lot of weapons that didn't actually make it to the battlefield, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the SKS, it was developed in 1943 by the Soviets, and it went into one battle for like a trials. And that was an early version, like what we have now with the SKSs you see now, the SKS 45 and the Chinese Type 56. They're kind of like the descendants of the first one that was produced in 1943.
Jeez. So, all right, let me phrase the question like this, then maybe it'll be easier to answer. Is there a weapon out there from that era that you really want that you've yet to come across and purchase?
You know, it's interesting. I don't have very many like rare guns of that World War II time frame, but if there was something, and I have come across them, they're a pretty penny though. It's the SVT-40. The SVT-40 was the Russian semi-automatic rifle, and then probably second to that would be like the G43, which was the Germans' semi-automatic rifle.
Is that same caliber as like the SKS, or is it a smaller?
Oh, these are larger calibers. So
Larger?
your SVT-40 is going to shoot your 7.62 by 54R, same one that's in the Mosin.
Yeah. All right.
And then your G43 is an 8mm. So, it's pretty big. The SKS carbine was developed specifically for smaller, medium engagement distances. So when you think about warfare, how it changed, I think a lot of countries realized that fighting was taking place in urbanized areas where you didn't need a long rifle, and it made it difficult to go into those urbanized areas and use a long bolt action rifle. So they needed something smaller, something that you could, still have a good punch, still take down your enemy, but something that you can manage the recoil on too.
Yeah. Is there anything specific about those two weapons, the SVT and the G43?
43, yeah.
Is there anything specific about those that makes them so attractive to you?
Well, the SVT-40 is kind of like the pre-SVD, right? I mean, it was the it was the Soviet Union's attempt at a semi-automatic rifle, and they actually produced them in pretty good quantities, and they had them out there in combat, but they didn't issue them like the Americans issued the M1 Garand. They didn't mass issue them. They didn't have them as the standard rifle. Same thing with the G43. The G43 is more of like a sniper, a semi-automatic sniper role, and also, a semi-automatic rifle. But Hitler believed in the 98K bolt-action rifle because of its reliability and its bolt-action design. And when you look at history, you could see that a semi-automatic rifle was really an innovative rifle, and for it to be mass issued or produced as the standard infantry rifle for a armed force, it really gives an advantage to that force. Whereas the Soviet Union and Germany during World War II, they were still using bolt actions, and pretty much every other nation was using bolt actions so as their primary weapon. The M1 Garand was the only semi-automatic rifle during the war that was issued as a standard infantry rifle, like a primary standard.
Yeah. What was it before the M1 Garand?
It was a 1903 Springfield rifle.
All right. Now, you have one of those, right?
Right. So the 1903 and the 1903 A3 was used early in the war because the M1 Garand yet wasn't mass-produced and wasn't distributed to all the units yet. Mm-hmm. So when a new rifle comes into service, there has to be the numbers, and it gets divvied onto different troops. And so a lot of troops that were in the Pacific Theater during the early stages of the war, right after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, they were stuck with 1903 Springfields. They didn't have the M1 Garand.
Jeez. Hey, y'all, pardon the interruption, but I need to take a minute to tell you about my good friends over at Kings Creek Apparel. Kings Creek Apparel is an outdoor lifestyle brand centered around fellowship, family, and a deep love for the outdoors. When I got the chance to speak with the owner, Jesse Strickland, I could really feel that he and his family have lived through these values and had sewn them into the DNA of Kings Creek, making them a very appealing company to work with. As an example of this, at the beginning of the pandemic last year, the folks over at Kings Creek decided to launch a project where kids could order a blank Kings Creek logo t-shirt and 3 fabric markers, all with free shipping. And you know what they did? They donated 100% of the proceeds to frontline workers and local families in need. It's things like this and countless other projects that Kings Creek is always embarking on that's caused them to not only be a community favorite, but a Southern staple. Speaking of Southern staples, let's talk one of the most iconic Southernisms, country music. Some of y'all that are plugged into the country music scene might have noticed that some of Nashville's best are rocking the wood duck. I'm talking about the amazingly talented Ray Fulcher, Luke Combs, and many other country music greats and up-and-comers. What's interesting to me is that their music has touched the lives of millions of people throughout the world. So to see these guys champion a brand that cherishes creating real, meaningful relationships is not only truly inspiring, but a real testament to their character. All the products over at Kings Creek have really clean and simple designs on top of amazing quality materials, making it not only easy on the eyes, but easy on the body. My personal favorites are the black rubber duck hat, the navy and gray striped performance polo, and the Kings Creek script t-shirt. Again, I can't stress this enough, guys. They're amazingly soft, and you can feel the quality. It's immaculate. The products are amazing. So please head to their website at kingscreekapparel.com to browse their collections. Again, that's kingscreekapparel.com. If you're a social media junkie, I would also encourage you to follow their social medias at Kings Creek Apparel to stay updated on all of the newest releases and deals. Do you think the M1 Garand played a major part in the U.S. allies, like kind of turning the tide in the war?
I think it did. General Patton named it the greatest battle implement ever devised. And when you think about it, it really gives our infantry troops a leg up on firepower. You can put more bullets downrange at your targets than someone with a bolt action can bring back at you, right? And there's stories. When you look at some of the stories, this guy will say, I remember seeing a documentary where this guy says, I took out 3 of them Germans and, they only got 1 shot at me. But I had 8 shots before I had to change my magazine or change to a different clip. So when you think about it, there is, an advantage, a big advantage.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. That's man, and you know what? It's a 30-06, so that's a long range. That bullet will carry for quite some distance.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you go to the Talladega Marksmanship Park in Talladega, Alabama, they've got a 600-yard range, all electronic target. You can do 100 yards, you could do 200 yards, 300 yards, but the 600 yards, you'd be surprised when what you can touch at 600 yards with a 30-06 from an M1 Garand.
Man, have you gotten into any like scopes, like old school scopes?
No, I haven't. I don't have any scoped rifles that are military surplus, sadly. Not to say that I've seen some, and there's a lot of reproduction. The thing is, there's a lot of reproductions out there. So, and usually I try to shop local. Usually I try to get the better deal. I try not to overpay for a lot. I did see a G43 with a scope, I believe. But when it comes down to it, I don't have any scoped weapons.
Yeah. I assume it would make a big difference in price having a scoped weapon.
Oh, yeah, it probably doubles the value. Usually, so like a Mosin Nagant without a scope is going to be, well, now they go for a lot more than what they used to, but a Mosin Nagant without a scope be like half the price. With the scope, a Mosin Nagant also has to have a different bolt, so it has to have a bent bolt. So, just seeing one in a sniper configuration, it's going to go for well over $1,000.
Why does that have to be is that because the scope's off to the side? Is that
no, the
World War II era or?
See, if you look at your Mosin Nagant, it has a straight bolt.
Mm-hmm.
The bolt sticks out straight. Well, if you lift up on the bolt, the scope gets in the way. So you're going to hit the scope. So if it has a bent bolt, you then hit it. You turn it up, and it won't interfere with the scope.
I got you now. Interesting. So what got you into the whole collectible or military surplus weapons game? Did you like the history first and then get into the firearms, or was it firearms first and then you started to kind of be like, whoa, look at the history behind this and get into that?
So interestingly enough, I've always been a big like World War II fan, like a World War II films, and I really think that movies like Saving Private Ryan, where you had the military advisor, which was Dale Dye, bring out the realism of those wars, right? Of those battles, of the soldiers themselves, right? Dale Dye's he's the military advisor for quite a few big movies. When you think about Band of Brothers, when you think about Saving Private Ryan, when you think about Full Metal Jacket, I mean they have some realistic traits to those. When you think about Platoon, right? Look at Platoon. Like when that movie came out, it was like, whoa, that's super realistic. Like they really portrayed the Vietnam War really well. And that's because you have people like Dale Dye, military advisor, taking control and saying, no, these are actors that need to portray the historic characters. And he'd served, so he knows, how they dressed, how they acted, how they walked, how they talked, how they marched, how they shot, how they operated.
Yeah. Is there a movie that you like cling on to the most, something that you find the most accurate? Not even accurate, that's a poor way to say it. Like, is there a World War II era movie, or just any military movie in general, that you just love?
Well, this is you going into favorites again. I'm not really good at picking favorites, but I'd have to go with Platoon.
Platoon?
Yeah.
I'm going to catch some flack for this. I've never seen it.
What? Oh, come
Never
on,
seen
man. They play it on TV like all the time, too. You might be sitting at work. It might come on TV.
Yeah. I'm one of those weird people that doesn't have cable. I'm a Hulu Live kind of
Well,
guy.
that's fine. You could always, watch it online, too.
Yeah.
Or find a bootleg.
That's, now, Platoon has Arnold Schwarzenegger, or is it Sylvester Stallone?
No, they doesn't have any of those guys.
What?
Come on.
I could have sworn.
Okay, Tom Berenger, right? Charlie Sheen, Johnny Depp, Forrest Whitaker, right?
Alrighty.
Directed by man. Now I'm gonna get some slack for this. Who's Oliver Stone? Directed by Oliver Stone, military advisor Dale Dye.
I'll have to check that out now.
Yep.
I'm gonna definitely catch some flack for that, especially.
Oh, William Dafoe too. William Dafoe was another character and another main character in there.
What movie Am I thinking of Predator? Like what movie?
You're probably thinking of Predator.
That's so far off.
So far off. Yeah.
I
Go
coulda
watch
swore.
Platoon already. All right.
Maybe I'm mixing like Rambo and Predator.
Yeah, you're mixing both of those up like that. No, that is not Platoon. That would have been a funny Platoon. Like, get to the chopper now.
Oh my gosh.
The Viet Cong will come in.
Yeah.
Yeah, get your AR-15.
Hey, Adrian.
You're Adrian. Yeah.
Oh, that's so
You
good.
probably just cut all that out.
No, that is perfect. That is hilarious. So what? All right, I'm gonna take it back to the firearm game now. Here, what was your first weapon of choice? Like what, or not weapon of choice? What was the first weapon that you purchased? Like what kicked off the collection?
Okay, so the collection. Okay, so I like watching movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
I grew up watching movies. I grew up watching TV shows, like World War II based. I watched documentaries. I watched The Longest Day. I watched Tor, right? I watched older movies and I watched newer movies. So being in filmmaking class, I had a knack for making movies. So I'd always go to surplus stores and try to find stuff that was like World War II surplus. And at the time, this is like early 2000s, they're still kind of cheap. You can get some like World War II helmets for like $20, right? So I would buy like uniform pieces, helmets, stuff like that, and canteens and just the little knacks. And then over time, I accumulated a uniform collection, right, or a accessory collection, right. And some of the stuff was not World War II era. It was like reproduction, right,
Mm-hmm.
which was okay because I was filming movies and filming stuff on the side. But my first actual like surplus rifle was an SKS, and I didn't really start. I mean, I did have prop weapons for these movies. So I had an M1 Garand that was a prop weapon. This is like 2015, 2013, about that time range. I was buying a bunch of these like dummy guns, right? And I would use them in these movies. And, eventually I was like, you know what? I got to get me one, right? So, I got an SKS around 2016 or so, 2016. And also ended up getting a 1903 A3 Springfield rifle. And really those two rifles were, once I started doing a lot of the history research, I realized, hey, this is really cool. Like, these rifles have a lot of heritage. And the greatest, they were used by, some of the greatest generations that, we've ever known.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very humbling, I would say, to know people who have served in that era. They didn't volunteer. They were drafted for a lot of it. So it's very humbling to meet those people and hear their stories, what they went through. Granted, it's a different ball game now, but war back then was in your face, brutal.
Well, I mean, a lot of them did volunteer during the World War II, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, it really brought America close. It really pointed the finger to Japan and Germany and said those countries are evil, and we as Americans were attacked. And as Americans, we united. We manufactured far more tanks, far more ships. We manufactured tons of weapons, right? We sacrificed a lot. Like the American families sacrificed so much. And America fought a war on two sides, the Pacific theater and the European theater. And, they helped out the Allies, tremendously. And within a matter of, from 41 to 45, in a matter of 4 years, the war was over.
Yeah, that's quick. And, I mean, it's not quick, but, when you're comparing it to the Afghanistan or Iraq wars, it's relatively quick.
Oh, yeah.
Was there a draft then in World War II? Maybe I'm getting Vietnam mixed up.
I mean, there was a draft, right?
Yeah.
But there was a lot of people that said, you know what, I'm going to join, right? And there was a joining factor. There was a call to service. Now, in Vietnam, there was a draft, and it was the opposite. It was, I don't want to fight that war,
Yeah.
It seemed more of like a political move, and the American people were kind of like, life's good in here in America. I don't want to go to Vietnam and die.
Yeah, absolutely. It's yeah, I think I was getting those two mixed up, but yeah, World War II, man, that was I think it was so interesting to a lot of people just because it's probably one of the most recent times, like in recent history, where there's true evil in the world, right? And it was exposed and really there.
Yeah, yeah, and the media, they portrayed the enemy of the United States very well, as Japan, Imperial Japan, and Nazi Germany.
It produced some fighting tactics. That's when guerrilla warfare really kicked off, and we were able to learn from that. Took a lot of heat initially, but we were able to learn from that.
Right.
Yeah, it was just a very big learning curve for.
Right, and it was the first time that helicopters were actually used. First Cav, right? They went in there with helicopters just like that. There were helicopters used for like air assault missions.
I didn't know that helicopters. That was the first time they were used.
Well, they were the first time they were used for like those air assault type missions.
Oh,
right?
already.
I mean, the helicopters were used, for other. They didn't really like have tactics set up yet for like helicopters until they weren't used in that tactical situation until the Vietnam War, and during the Cold War they had helicopters too, but when you think about it, in mass they were used. And the Huey helicopter, UH-1 Huey, was an effective helicopter for doing those operations. And they could take a lot of bullets. They were able. A lot of pilots. Had good things to say about the UH-1.
Was that and this might be just some fictitious story that I've heard over time, but did they use the Huey blades to like chop down trees at some point?
I don't know.
I could have swore I heard this at one point where like they'd come in and like clear some branches, but that doesn't seem right.
It doesn't seem right at all. I mean, it seems like you're asking for a disaster.
Yeah. Anyways, I wanted to come back to, I said it produced good music. So when I think of the Vietnam War, one of the things that comes to my head is the song Fortunate Son by CCR.
Right.
And I just imagine like everybody, the troops walking in the tall grass and then a Huey or a helicopter flying over by and that song playing in the background. That's why I said like it produced good music. It produced a very memorable point in time. Like you said, it was a very political war. So
yeah, it was a pivot, and I mean, it wasn't a pivot, but I mean, like the Vietnam War, there was a lot of cultural references that come out of that time frame. You talk about the hippie generations, right? And Fortunate Son was, a anti-military song when you think about it. He talks about, he's not the fortunate one; he's the one that goes to war, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like because it was not liked amongst so many, there was a lot of music or cultural like themes and theme songs that came out of it. And I think of like Jimi Hendrix, All Along the Watchtower, all those songs from that 60s, 70s era is I think very powerful music. But
oh yeah, Jimi Hendrix was a great guitar player.
Like, my gosh,
like there was so many notes that guy can touch and get to in just a quick amount of time. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's funny because I mean, not a lot of people my age and the millennial generation, especially like the later ones towards the late 90s, they don't really listen to music like that anymore. And I think that it's very good music. Like the sound it's very true to that time. It's its own sound, like when you hear it on the radio, you can say, I bet you that's from the 60s/70s era. But I think it also can teach us a lot. Like if you really listen to the lyrics, like All Along the Watchtower, that's another Vietnam era song talking about like being out on a patrol on the Watchtower. So very interesting. That era collectible to you? Like, do you find any firearms in there, or
so
do you go like World War II and back? Like, do you have like a?
So the issue with the there's a few issues with trying to collect surplus from the Vietnam War. Now, yes, you can collect Chinese pistols, Chinese SKSs, and those are really the big ones that come out of that Vietnam War era. Are those Chinese SKSs because they're semi-automatic, right? Now, the M16A1 fully automatic. M16 or AK-47 also fully automatic. So in order to get those, attain those rifles, you're gonna have to buy a parts kit, or just maybe somebody brought them back from the war, and you have to get a Class 3 license. So I don't have a Class 3 license, so not yet.
Not yet, folks. Soon, Battlefield Curator.
You would get a part kit, and you can actually build it on a you take an M16A1 part kit, and you can put it together with a new barrel and a new receiver, and it'll be semi-automatic, and you got something that was from that Vietnam War era. Now, interestingly enough, when I went to basic training,
I was just about to say this. So
we had M16A2s that actually said M16A1, but the 1 was slashed out and a 2 was carved next to it. or in some of them, the 2 was carved over it. And I was like, that's interesting. So the U.S. Army just kind of took these M16A1s and retrofitted them and called them M16A2s.
Was there any big change between the A1 and A2? Or was it just like a rebrand?
So you had the handguard, you had, I believe, some of the internals. I'm not too certain. I know you had the forward assist changed a little bit. I think there was a few things, So, I mean, when you think about it, the military might make changes to small parts and say, okay, well, we're having an issue with this, and then they, they'll do some research and be like, okay, this small part needs to get changed out. Maybe it needs to be a thicker type of metal or a stronger metal, or maybe it needs to be a different shape or a different size, right? So, when they get retrofitted, it's just the newer parts that come out. So you'll pretty much, if you get a surplus weapon, it's going to have a lot of hodgepodge parts if it's been in service for many decades.
Yeah, I think you said like that not a lot changes, like small things will change over time. I want to say it's the Browning, the 50 cal. In like the last 50 or so years, the only thing that they've changed on it is some like trigger or something, like one part. That was it. And it was just, that's it. It's still in use today. Like, yeah, it's a very well-produced weapon.
There's a lot of World War II era 50 cals, Browning 50 cals, right? But another thing they changed with the 50 cal is the barrels are like screw-on, where you don't need to do a headspace and timing now.
Really?
Yep.
How do they? I mean, you gotta wait till that.
I don't know how it works, but I've definitely heard about it throughout some of the Army community.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about it, because when you shoot, having shot like a saw or something like that, where it's a lot of bullets coming out at it, like over a short amount of time, it gets hot. So that would take you got to either have hands, like something on your hands to change the barrel, or.
Yeah, so I mean, you had gloves. There's like barrel changing gloves.
Bring out the gloves.
Necessarily, I don't think they changed out the barrel
in the midst of
war with the gloves on. It depends,
Yeah.
And it depends what kind of firefighting is going on.
True. So I'm gonna take this back to the whole Battlefield Curator now. How did you get the name Battlefield Curator?
Okay, so. So me and my buddy Matt, we were starting up this Instagram channel, right? I wanted to start Instagram first, and I also want to do a Facebook page, and then eventually get into the YouTube. But I wanted to test the waters, and I was like, okay, I think there's a niche for this. So we went through several different names, and Battlefield Curator just stuck. It was just one of those that was like, that sounds really good. It sounds really good off the tongue. And then, when I made the logo, that's when I was like, yes.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet. It's a bayonet.
Yeah, so it's a M1 carbine bayonet.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, it's a really cool idea. I like the name Curator. It's kind of like this historian perspective on Battlefield stuff. I mean, it's not just guns that you're into, right, in the channel, because I mean, I've seen some playlists where you have like metal detecting findings.
Right.
Do you do that just here in Georgia, or
no,
do you
so
go?
that was in South Carolina, and so I named it Battlefield Curator. It's just, you have different relics from different time frames, from different periods, and I do enjoy metal detecting somewhat. But when it comes down to curation of history, I think that's where the curator came from, is just looking at all of history. And, eventually I kind of want to venture around and check out a lot more museums and feature them on the channel as well, because I think a good place for you to go and learn about history is to go to, the museums and venture around and walk around the military section and look at the different changes throughout military history.
Yeah. What other so you just kind of did that metal detecting as like just a fun thing to do, and you decided to make content with it?
Well, I wanted to do it for, I had an opportunity, right? So when I see an opportunity, I say, okay, that's great. I would like to metal detect a Civil War battlefield, right? So I brought my camera. I look kind of goofy, a bunch of these guys are looking at me like, hey, this guy's out here with the camera, and one of the guys actually said, hey, I've been there, done that. I was like, oh, okay. He's like, I used to have my own TV show. I was like, wow, that's really cool. And he had a TV show on Discovery Channel.
Really?
Yeah, a long time ago. Apparently, it's a very small niche community, and it's not really that popular. Now, what you do see is there's a lot of World War II metal detectorists out of like Russia, right now, that are pulling out of the ground. They're still pulling out of the ground all these relics of World War II and even World War I. But when it comes down to it, that's pretty cool, And so they get a lot of hits on YouTube for that, and my son likes watching that.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be such a thrill to like be doing your little metal detecting, and you hear dee 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 dee, and you're like, oh, I wonder what the heck that is, and you're digging in there, and you find, I don't know, what's the coolest thing that you found so far?
I mean, when I find Civil War bullets, that's always, a cool factor for me. Now, my buddy Eric, he likes finding buttons. He's a big button guy. So when he finds a button, he's like, somebody was wearing a uniform or wearing this clothing, and the button fell off somehow. Maybe somebody was being dragged away from a gunshot wound.
Yeah.
And their button fell off and stayed there for over a century, and then he pulls it up, right? I mean, we found silver coins. We found, other things, other artifacts, like pieces of a gunpowder reservoir, right? So, I mean, different things. You put those pieces together, and it really creates a story. And then that's where archaeologists come into play. So, like, there are archaeologists and archaeological expeditions, and they try to piece together what actually happened, like how the story unfolded. And in general, metal detectorists, they like finding the history. They like the history about doing what they do and finding what they find too. But the difference is they get to keep their artifacts, where archaeologists they have to turn them in.
Right. Yeah. So you done the firearm background or like informational videos, things like that. You've done the metal detecting. What other videos have you produced? Like what others?
I did a little history excerpt on the Battle of the Bulge. It was right before Christmas, or around Christmas time that I did it. And when I was growing up, I had a family friend named Bill Kahn, and he was in the Battle of the Bulge. And I retold his story that he told me a couple decades ago.
That's pretty neat. Is that can you tell me a little bit more, like what happened at the Battle of the Bulge, like a quick little summary of what happened?
All right, so the Battle of the Bulge was like, it happened in the winter of 44, right? Right before Christmas time. And pretty much there was a stale, like kind of like Americans and the British and the Allies had pushed so far into already like Germany. They pretty much pushed up to the Ardennes Forest. And essentially, Hitler was like, hey, we're getting crushed on both sides. We need to make a last-ditch effort to pretty much sever the Allies. So he decided to put his best troops and his worst troops and put them together. So he had the SS, He had a bunch of SS groups, and he had some of the mercenary fighters in Germany, right? Some of the, just local recruits, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he put them together, and he said, hey, you guys got to take the supply base at Antwerp, which would sever the Allies' supply routes, especially in the winter. And they decided to attack the Allies with full force, SS Panzer divisions, Tiger tanks, artillery 88s, and infantry, right? Full-fledged assault, on these Allies. And the Allies, they have like a few people, just guarding the perimeter, just kind of like, just they weren't expecting that big of a push from Hitler's army, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Hitler pushed very far, and once the initial guards were taken out, you had a lot of support elements, and it's around Christmas time, so they're kind of chilling out, enjoying their time, the Christmas holidays, right? Some people are on leave in France and whatnot, right? And totally took the Allies by surprise, but they didn't get far. They got pretty far. They almost got to the base at Antwerp, but it was the coldest winter in like forever, right? It was one of the coldest winters ever recorded. And they were wasting more gas. The Germans were wasting more gas than they thought they would. And the conditions were sloshy, muddy, snowy. So they could only make it so far until they ran out of gas. And they were pretty much stopped. Like, there was a lot of resistance that was met, right? Mm-hmm. And you really saw a lot of heroes come out of the Battle of Bulge, right? You had a lot of allied, small teams, small groups that were defending an area and taking out hundreds of Germans before the Germans actually started to advance or capture them, right? So, the Allies really held out, and you saw a lot of history made in that battle. But once the Germans were stopped, then it was apparent that, and also you had Patton's army coming up from the south. Mm-hmm. From Italy. Patton's army came up from Italy and joined in the fight. Patton wanted to save the Allies. He came a little late, but he helped reinforce what had been broken, and he helped kind of push back the Germans or capture them. So after that Battle of the Bulge, it was apparent that Germany, that was their pretty much last ditch effort to try to win the war, and it failed.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So your family friend, Mr. Khan,
yeah,
he lived through that.
Yeah, he lived through that. He was captured during the Battle of the Bulge, and he said, he said a prayer. He was on a train, and the train was on his way to a POW camp, and the Allies. So part of the reason why the Germans were successful was because they were moving in the cover of the clouds, right? Mm-hmm. The Allies had air superiority. They had airplanes, right? Well, when it's cloudy conditions and bad weather, the Germans were able to make a move on the ground. Well, the skies cleared up December 24th, I believe. And the Germans, the air power came through, and the Germans were getting, hit pretty hard with airplane, bombs, strafe runs, stuff like that, right? Well, he was on a train headed for a POW camp with a lot of other POWs. Well, the Allies said, hey, look, there's a train. There's probably some kind of supply train or something. They didn't know it was POWs. So they started strafing the train. And he was in the train. He was getting strafed with a whole bunch of other guys. And
oh, my gosh.
They were getting bombed and all kinds of stuff. And the Germans were, I don't know what they were doing. But he said, he sat down. He's like, Lord, if you get me out of this war, I will forever praise you. I will forever just, be your servant. And just let me live through this, oh Lord, please. And sure enough, the plane stopped strafing, and he was mystified. And he went outside, and some of the Allied soldiers that broke through the train, got broken up or whatever. Mm-hmm. They broke out of a train car, and they formed a human POW sign on the ground. So it said POW, and the planes were waving their wings and flew off because they're like, oh, snap. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Sorry to almost kill y'all. Wow. That is a powerful story.
Yeah. So then from then on, he had to go on foot. So, I mean, you should watch the video and go back and, go back to Christmas time and look at my videos back then and really see what happened.
Wow. That is that's got to be such an experience to to live through that, and that's incredible.
Oh yeah,
It's
yeah,
very incredible. And then to live to tell the tale of, hey, this is how it happened. That is, wow. Shout out, Mr. Khan.
Yeah.
So, what else about Battlefield Curator? Where have you gone back to like the revolutionary times at all, or is
not in the
not yet?
videos yet, but I have gone back in some of the content, right? Some of the Instagram content, I've gone back into like the settlers when they came into the Americas, right?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's a war that's always interested me. Like coming over here, British people or English people coming over here, starting to not like the British government so much, like imposing their will from a distance, and that whole war being able to start from the ground up and take over the world superpower at that time, just with the 3%ers, right? That's 3% of the population.
Yeah,
Is that where that came from?
I don't know how what the percentage was, but essentially you had settlers in America that were making a business for themselves, and they didn't want to be taxed. They didn't want to have the British government imposed regulations on them.
Taxation without representation.
Right,
there was
right.
no
and
no
America was prospering really, really well. And you could see like now, like look at what Spain. I don't know if Spain really did the same thing that the British government did, right? Spain, when they went into South America, they did a horrible job, I guess. I would say, of trying to prosper from the land. They were
Right.
on the. And Spain was probably one of the bigger countries back then too. I mean, they had the Spanish Armada, right?
Yeah. All right. This just came to my head, and this is what I was going to talk to you about earlier. So at work, we've watched your videos, and we see you, and you've started wearing this hat and this leather jacket, and we call you the modern day Indiana Jones.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Hey,
Indy. How did you form this identity? Is this like, has leather goods always been like a like of yours, a passion of yours, or is this like the
this leather jacket? Yeah, this is probably bad for the kids, but I used to go out and party all the time in my younger years, and when I go to the strip club or when I go to some of the bars, and it'd be a little chilly, right? So I'd wear a leather jacket, and I'd have a bunch of cigars like in my jacket pocket, and it was cool because I would just start lighting up a cigar, and I get a lot of attention because I'm the guy with the cigars, and so all my homies that were with me, they'd also have cigars because I had them, and I'd just hand them out, and we had a little entourage going on. So I always like wearing leather jackets, and I settled down and I still wore a leather jacket. So I still wear a leather jacket. The hat, honestly, I like wearing a hat sometimes. It gets sunny out, and when you're out shooting firearms, it get a little hot, and so I start wearing this hat, and that's where I was like, let's just make a video with this hat.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, it fits. I feel like when I hear Battlefield Curator and I see a leather jacket and like an Indiana Jones style hat, I just feel like that fits so well. So I like it. It's part of your identity now, if you ask us.
Well, I've got another hat too, and I switched from either or hat. So
is the other hat, is that like the African safari?
That's like an Australian.
Or Australian, that's what I mean.
Yeah, it looks like an Australian. Kind of has that one side that just pops up,
Yeah.
But I like both of them. This one's fake leather. The other one's real leather. So
yeah, the one flaps up and the other one's down under.
Yeah.
That was a bad joke for everybody. I'm sorry. So, wow. Yeah, that is, I like leather goods, man. Like the leather jackets, I had one for a long time. They last a really long time if you take care of them.
Oh yeah, this jacket's this jacket's going on 9 years now, I think.
Wow.
And I got a brown leather jacket that I wear sometimes too, but I mainly just wear that when I would go to work or whatever.
Yeah, my dad he's a long time leather wearer of jackets, and it's one thing I can't, like, that smell is so distinguishable, like you open up the closet and you're like,
leather.
There's the leather jacket.
Yeah.
We're wearing it. So where do you want to take the YouTube channel in the future?
So, I just kind of like to share history. And when it comes down to it, I'm not really I'm not focused too much on seeing it grow. But, the more people I could reach by sharing some of the history, the more influence I have with, the people that want it the most, right?
Mm-hmm.
The people that want to learn more about some of these firearms, want to learn more about military history. And, I think it's important to look back in history and understand what happened in the past because, as you may know, history repeats itself.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the best things about YouTube in general is it gives people the opportunity to share something that they're passionate about. And to the same point, that's why I think podcasts are so great too, is it's like this long form conversation that you have that you can share your passions and enthusiasms with people. And you have the potentiality, if that's a word, but you have the potential to reach the world, really. I mean, you never know who's listening. They could be in Austria. I mean, it's the world's your oyster at that point. But and the other thing is you have the potential of monetary gain, which producing this content costs money. Like I've come to you and I've asked you about cameras to do like a video podcast. They're expensive to start.
Oh yeah.
So if you don't have the funds or you're not willing to spend the funds initially, it gives you the option of growth should you make money from it.
Right.
So that's awesome. All right. Well, we're at about an hour here. So I'd like to ask this question at the end of the podcast. So for the nation, if there's one piece of wisdom that you could share or leave as your legacy or just want to share in general, what would that be?
Oh, wow. One piece of information. Huh?
Yeah, I know it's a heavy, deep question, but you don't got to overthink it. Just something that you've learned in your lifetime that you think has played a very key role in your success.
One thing that's really played a key role in my success has been like the gathering of information, right?
Yeah.
Seeking knowledge, right? Invest in yourself. The more knowledge you attain, or the more pertinent knowledge you attain, the more you can kind of understand how things play out in life, and the more you can adapt and change, and realize, the right decisions to make.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's knowledge is power, man. That's part of For the Nation podcast. That's part of the reason I started this is I've been a self-proclaimed jack of all trades. It's me. I just love to learn new things all the time, right? If you were to ask me, I don't know, how long ago did we meet? Maybe 3 years ago. If you were to ask me 4 years ago, anything about World War II era guns or military history like that, I would have told you, I don't know. It's okay. But now I'm so interested in it. Like I bought a Mosin and Gaunt from you, and it's something that's so interesting to me. So I think that's a very valuable piece of advice is just continue to learn, be a lifelong learner, and press on. So is there anything that you want to plug?
Yeah. So Dan here with Battlefield Curator. And thanks for watching, guys. Be sure to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, Battlefield Curator.
Awesome. We'll leave a link in the description for you, all the listeners. Thank you. Thanks for doing this.
Make it a great day.
Absolutely.